Hello, I'm Rebecca McLaughlin, young adult author of Nameless Queen, which comes out in January 2020. And today I'm going to share with you a little bit about where I'm at drafting my next book. This week, I just hit 60,000 words, and based on all approximations of word count averages and how many chapters are outlined in my outline, that puts me at about 2/3 of the way through the entire book. So I currently have an agreement with a freelance editor, and part of that stipulates that we do the first draft, and I finish the first draft and deliver it to her 4 months from when we start working. So we formally started working at the beginning of August. Was it really just the beginning of August? Yes, it was. So what that means is that I'm 2/3 of the way done, about a month in. I did about 20,000 words of writing though before we started formally, tracking that time. So I'm definitely gonna finish on time before the deadline. I gave myself 4 months back in the day because I was starting this really long, complicated, intense project at work that was supposed to be done by the end of September. So I'm in a really good place as far as meeting my deadline. But a question was asked of me recently: what do you do when you're writing, you start to deviate from the outline? And does that change when you're working with an editor who may or may not have expectations about what you're providing to them? Well, I'll answer both of those questions. So question one is, if you're contractually obligated to provide something, and for example, my in-house editor at Penguin Random House has already approved that outline, so to some extent, I can't turn in a completely different book. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what are the magnitude of the changes that you're looking at when you start writing? Because the long and short of it is this: you are going to make changes as you write. That is just natural. And part of that is because when you write an outline, you have an idea, a concept of what you want the world to be, of what you want the characters to be, the conflict, the arcs. But when you start getting to know those characters and when you start getting to know the world, those arcs may change. And that is completely natural. Don't freak out, don't worry, it's okay. In fact, that's actually good. Part of the point of writing an outline is to give you guide rails that help you create your story and stay on track. It gives you a sense of where to go. I have found often that if I don't outline, what I do is I sit and stare at a blank page and I ponder and wonder about what the right next move is. And there's an infinity of choices, and how am I supposed to pick the right one? Well, what an outline does is it gives you a map. You pick all of those choices before you even start. And honestly, that can be really hard. I had a real tough time with it, but I'm so glad I did. Because now that I'm drafting, now that I'm writing, I am able to lean on the outline, and I don't have to freak out every time I get to the end of a chapter or the middle of a chapter and I don't know what to do next, because I know where I'm supposed to go. That outline helps me get there. So, what kind of changes are okay and what kind of changes are not okay? So, changes that are not okay are things like that change the entire dynamic of the book, or that change the genre or the category and audience it's aimed towards. Sometimes things that have central changes to your character's arc aren't okay. What I mean by not okay isn't that you can't do those things. It's that if you're getting to the point writing, working with an editor, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this book is a lot darker than I thought it was. I think it might be adult, not young adult, or I think it might be young adult, not middle grade. Just have that conversation. Talk with your editor, talk with your agent, talk with whomever, and see if what you're thinking of, this new direction, this new idea, works. Because chances are, if the changes you've made are going to lead to a better story, your editor is going to be on board. Everyone's going to be on board because everyone wants the better story. And you shouldn't limit yourself to an idea you had months ago, because if you have a better idea now, speak up. It's probably the right move. So that's a bit of general advice in terms of how to handle outlines compared to drafting. An outline is the guideline, it's the map, but it's not the rule. It's not every single second of every single scene. And as you mature, as your story matures, it may go in a different direction naturally, And oftentimes that's something that you can and should pursue. And I will give you a for instance. So for example, in writing this book, the second book that I'm working on right now, they had me re-outline the first half, and I did it in beats outlines. And I did it on sort of like a beats level. So every chapter had like between 3 and 5 bullets of things that were gonna happen or scenes that were gonna happen. And it kind of, in a drastically had a shortening effect and increased the tension and the pacing for the story. And making those changes, bringing it down to scale, really had a positive impact in terms of the compressing the tension, heightening it, and then just getting through the timeline a bit more quickly. But I didn't really touch the second half because I figured it's probably fine. It wasn't fine. So because I changed the first half, suddenly pieces in the second half weren't lining up anymore. So I had this technically approved outline, which technically flowed, but then now that I'm in this, chapter 11, chapter 13, that scene, I moved it earlier. It's in the first half of the book now. I kind of accidentally wrote it sooner because that's where it fit best. So that means I have to come up with a new scene in chapter 12 suddenly. I looked at my outline to see what I was going to work on next, and it said, oh, a mob happens. And I'm like, why? Well, mob happened 2 chapters ago because it made more sense over there. So then I had to come up with, a new scene to put in this chapter. And I did ask myself the question, do I have to ask my editor before I do this? And I didn't. And part of the reason was I looked at what the next chapter was going to have, and I thought, oh, well, I can get us there to that chapter and just change the events. We're still going to have an issue that they're overcoming in this chapter. You have those mini arcs that you get through, but it was just going to be a different event. So to be fair, I haven't sent those chapters to my editor yet, so I don't know if she hates them or not, but she'll let me know. If I went too far off the rails, she'll say, hey, I noticed you went off the rails. Why don't we just bring that back in, lasso it, staple it to the ground, bury it under some dirt, and just quit moving. Just kidding. I don't think my editor's gonna say that. I think that she'll be, I hope, pleasantly surprised by the turn of events, because I think on reflection, I realized that a lot of that chapter was sort of talking and discussion, and the outline was more me describing why something was happening as opposed to the actual actions of something else. So I had to put in some more filler into that chapter, and that was just a natural progression in writing. I'm currently working at the 2/3 mark, and I'm sort of at a montage scene where my characters got to teach someone else how to do this thing, and I think it's a moment that's ready. It's a moment that's ready for comedy and some growth and some banter, but I'm worried it's just gonna feel a little flat, like it's not gonna be very exciting. I think I need to have a dramatic bad thing happen, either in this chapter or the next chapter, to keep the pace moving forward. And none of those things are precisely in the outline. I think in this section of the outline, it was more about what's happening between my main and secondary characters, how the relationship is shifting and evolving, and the things that they discuss or the opinions that they have that is able to facilitate this change in their relationship. But I kind of want something to explode. I don't like to go very many chapters in a row without something cinematically dramatic happening. That's just kind of how I am. I do enjoy the quieter moments, but I really just enjoy, goodness knows, I can write a dialogue scene that stretches on for pages. My editor calls this too much chit chat. And that's when I have a scene where characters are talking a lot but not doing anything. Because really they should be doing something, and then maybe they should be doing something and talking, but they really need to be doing something most of the time. All right. So all of that to say, you should feel comfortable with the idea, the concept that the outline you make doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to spell out every single moment of every single scene. It doesn't have to perfectly illustrate your character's arc from the beginning to end of the story. But what it should do is it should give you the very core tenets of your story, those guide rails to push you forward, because what you want your outline to do is to help you when you get stuck. And that isn't something that it's going to do on the moment by moment, scene by scene level, but it's going to say, where do I have to go next? What type of thing has to happen in the next chapter? How do I get there? And every author, if they do outlines, can do them differently. You can have one as detailed as you want, you can have it as high level as you want, but as long as it helps you, then that is its purpose. And don't be afraid that it'll change when you start writing, because of course it'll change. That's okay, that's wonderful and good, in fact. Embrace it and let the story grow. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. I hope that you've enjoyed some advice and my experience on outlines, and I will see you next week. Bye!